Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Undersecretary Torres Moll, welcome. Nice to see you. I often say the best ideas don't come from Washington, they come from Ohioans. And this summer I started holding roundtables about the Farm Bill and what we needed to do. I've done that every 5 years, as I know the chair has, and many others over the last decade and a half. I've heard from growers from many different sectors of the agricultural economy in Ohio, from apples to cattle, maple syrup to dairy, everything in between. We know USDA needs to better support local food producers and value-added agriculture through processing and marketing opportunities, processing equipment, related infrastructure, the lack of workable options for small and mid-sized producers to access affordable capital for equipment and processing needs came up at several of these roundtables in my state. How do we expand support for local processing capacity and value-added agriculture?
Senator Brown, thank you so much for that question and for listening to rural Ohioans. I had the chance to get to visit a meat processing plant that received one of our MPEP awards, and it's a really small processor out in the Appalachian part of Ohio who is providing value by focusing on adding labels to local meat processors' meat. And so they're choosing this option because it's allowing them to increase their value and also sustaining more resilient options when it comes to meat processing in general. It was really a neat thing to see, and I wasn't surprised because it was a local vision that we were helping to support. When it comes to more options for meat processing, it really does provide great value. Whether it's reaching a higher cost market or whether it's being able to retain a workforce that's really proud of the work that they do, that has upward mobility in that workforce system, or whether it means being flexible when there are challenging times.
Thank you. Last May, Madam Secretary, you joined Senator Smith, who was chairing, a member of this committee, chairing a banking and housing subcommittee with Senator Rounds as the ranking member, in which the subcommittee examined the programs of the Rural Housing Service. The Rural Housing Service provides critical affordable housing to communities across the country, about 13,000 families in Ohio. Can you talk about the need to preserve and expand affordable rental housing supported by the Rural Housing Service?
Affordable rental housing is crucial, and our portfolio, as you know, is declining. We have about 400,000 rental units currently, but by 2050, we will lose over 333,000 of those. That's why preservation is crucial, both in terms of making sure that that housing stock is good stock, that people are in places they deserve to have a healthy, clean place to live, but also in terms of maintaining rental assistance that right now is tied to the debt of those facilities. We also need to expand when it comes to investment in construction of new rental properties so that we can not just look at our aging stock, but how we invest into the future.
So how do we do more of that? What do you do, and what can we do together, perhaps also with HUD, to kind of follow up on what Senator Smith has been attempting to do with Senator Rounds? How do we build more?
We're eager to continue to provide technical assistance on some efforts that I appreciate you mentioning Senator Smith. She's been working hard on this and are glad to provide more technical assistance on that effort. The preservation and construction, both of those are crucial. And then I would also offer decoupling of rental assistance from the debt of the buildings. So that way, if it doesn't need to be refinanced, we can just keep the rental assistance available for families.
Last minute or so, talk to me a little bit more about the Cooperative Center for Excellence helping to expand cooperative research and capacity building.
Cooperatives are an incredible model. I mean, they're long-lasting. If you look at whether it's sugar beets or your local federal credit union or rural electric co-ops, which we've been talking about today, it's a great model. I was in Arkansas recently and saw a grocery store that turned into a worker-owned cooperative because the chain was leaving. So it's a great way to be able to respond to challenges, but it does take some, again, we're talking technical assistance. How do you do the bylaws? How do you create that forum so that people can have ownership in whatever they're creating. And so the cooperative, so we're providing assistance for how to navigate and all that red tape in establishing.
And the technical assistance always comes from you or elsewhere also?
We fund nonprofits that then provide that technical assistance in their local communities.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Highsmith.
Earlier this week, we celebrated Labor Day, a day when Americans come together to honor the people who make this country work. Whether you punch a clock, whether you swipe a badge, whether you earn a salary, whether you make tips, whether you're caring for children or an aging parent, all labor has dignity. When work has dignity, hard work pays off for everyone, no matter who you are, where you live, what kind of work you do. Yet we know for so many Americans, their work simply doesn't pay off like it should. Look at what's happened in Minnesota and Ohio and Rhode Island, and I know Senator Grassley's coming out in Iowa. Look what's happened over the last 30 and 40 years. Executive salaries have soared. CEO pay is up 1,300% since 1978, 1,300%. Corporate profits risen, stock prices up, workers more productive than ever before. But for decades, wages barely budged. For most Americans, their purchasing power has largely been flat for some 5 decades because Wall Street rewards corporations that raise prices without raising paychecks. Wall Street rewards stock buybacks. Wall Street rewards union busting. Wall Street really rewards shipping jobs overseas. Wall Street rewards automating jobs. Wall Street rewards outsourcing full-time in-house work to contractors. Wall Street analysts actually downgrade stock prices when American companies invest in American workers in American production. If a company owns a new factory in Ohio, Wall Street might often downgrade its stock. If that same company instead buys back its own stock, sending 40% of the returns to foreign investors, Wall Street rewards it. We work to change that. For the first time in far too long, we have a government on the side of workers. We have a dues-paying union member as labor secretary. Madam President, contrast this labor secretary, laborers union activist, carried a union card before he came, I think he still does, as Secretary of Labor. Contrast that with the Trump Secretary of Labor, who worked for one of the major world leaders in union busting, who made millions of dollars a year by busting unions. We took on big oil. We have a National Labor Relations Board actually looking out for workers and willing to go after union busting. We passed the most pro-worker infrastructure bill ever, the strongest Buy America provisions ever in a piece of legislation. We've taken historic steps to put workers first, to invest in American workers, to make our economy work for every American, not just CEOs, not just Wall Street. That's what you came to the Senate from Minnesota for. That's what Senator Whitehouse came from Rhode Island for, to make these fights. We passed the CHIPS Act to bring our supply chains home, to bring down prices for American families, to create thousands, tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs in Ohio and across the country. This groundbreaking that President Biden and I and Congressman Ryan and others are going to do this Friday in Licking County, Ohio, will mean, at a minimum, 5,000 good-paid union building trades jobs: carpenters, electricians, pipe fitters, laborers, ultimately millwrights, so many others, at least 5,000 over the next 2 or 3 years that will last at least 10 years. Passing the CHIPS Act brings our supply chains home to bring down prices for American families. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, taking on 3 of the most powerful specialist interests in Ohio and in Washington. We took on the big drug companies, big pharma, to bring down drug prices. We took on big oil to lower energy prices and create jobs, union jobs in the industries of the future. We took on Wall Street, finally taxing stock buybacks that reward CEOs and executives at the expense, always at the expense, Madam President, of workers and jobs. These are big wins for workers. Together, the biggest steps we've taken in decades to create an industrial policy that puts our most valuable resource, American workers, first. It counters the business model where corporations hopscotch the globe in search of lower wages and lower wages and lower wages. From the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, we lay down a new marker. The technology of the future, from semiconductors to batteries to electric vehicles, will be developed in America, made in America by American workers. Hasn't been easy, our work's far from finished, but I'm optimistic. I see more momentum behind the labor movement than any time in my career. All over the country, more and more workers are seeing that unions are the best way to have a voice, from Starbucks to Amazon. 70% of Americans, I don't ever remember it being that high, 70% of Americans approve of unions, for sure the highest level of support in 50 years. More people than ever want to join a union. They know that carrying a union card, it means higher wages, it means better benefits, it means better working conditions, it means more control, particularly for young families or families taking care of an aging parent, more control over your schedule. We know what workers are up against when they organize. Corporations unleash all their power to fight their own workers, too often illegally. Mr. Scharf, is Wells Fargo too broken to fix?
Chairman Brown, I'm very confident that we have made changes which will enable us to put all of our historical problems behind us. As I mentioned in my testimony, we're an entirely different company today. We have a new management team. We've changed our processes. The plans that we have in place across all of the identified historical issues are being executed upon. And the team that we have working on this has the experience and the knowledge to get the work done.
Thank you. It just seems to a lot of us, CEO after CEO, year after year, scandal after scandal, nothing seems to be, nothing at Wells Fargo seems to improve. Let me go down the line. I will ask a series of yes or no questions. You all have a legal and moral responsibility to do right by your workers and your customers and expand access to affordable banking to everyone, yet ordinary Americans still are denied basic access that all of us here take for granted. Ensuring fair access to banking requires your management teams to make it a central focus. I'm going to ask questions with that in mind, how you can better serve your customers and workers, and please answer yes or no. Starting again with Mr. Scharf, will you eliminate all forced arbitration clauses which take away a consumer's choice on how best to pursue justice with a bank? Yes or no?
No.
Mr. Moynihan?
For bank products, we eliminated many years ago.
Mr. Diamond?
No.
Ms. Fraser?
No.
Mr. Rogers?
We allow consumers and our new products to opt out of arbitration.
Mr. Cesare?
No.
Mr.
We allow consumers to opt out.
Raise your hands if you are committed to fighting against discrimination. Okay, thank you. Therefore, I think I can count on your support, right? That for the Fair Access to Financial Services Act, which would prohibit banks and other financial institutions from discriminating on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, or sex. The Fair Access to Financial Services Act, Mr. Scharf, will you support it?
I don't know the specifics of it, but the things you mentioned, absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Moynihan?
The principles were already regulated too, but I don't know the specifics of the act.
Mr. Diamond?
Exactly the same position.
Fraser?
Yes, the same position. We don't know the specifics, but we endorse the principles.
Mr. Rogers?
We endorse the principles you just outlined, but I'm not aware of the specifics of that act.
Consistent, Chairman, we endorse the principles as well, and I do not know the specifics.
Mr.
The
Demchak?
same, thank you.
Okay, I think you all have really good staff, and I would have thought you would know more about a bill like that before you come in front of the committee, but we will follow up. Next question, I'll start from the right, Mr. Scharf, so you don't have to start this time. Mr. Demchak, is your bank opening unauthorized bank accounts?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Is your bank opening unauthorized bank accounts?
No.
Mr. Cesare?
Chairman Brown, we regret, and I take full responsibility that we did open up unauthorized bank accounts. It is going back to 2010. It's unacceptable. It's inconsistent with our principles and procedures as well as our ethics. We identified 342 accounts over that time, and that's against a population of 40 million opened accounts. We took remediation, we took care of the customers, we corrected the credit pulls, and we reimbursed any fees. We also made sure that we strengthened our policies and procedures back in 2016, and that plan is what we're consistently going to continue to do on a go-forward basis.
And you will no longer open unauthorized accounts, I assume, from
Not
that
to-
answer.
Is not tolerated.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers?
We don't tolerate the opening of unauthorized accounts, and we have extensive training policies with our teammates.
Ms. Fraser?
We do not believe that we have opened any unauthorized accounts. Thank you.
Mr.
I
Diamond?
certainly hope that we don't. We have procedures in place to stop it, and if someone violated those procedures, they probably wouldn't be at the company.
Mr. Moynihan?
We have procedures to do. There's a massive review done of all our banks in the mid-2000 to 2010 to 2020 decade, and we run those procedures every day.
Mr. Scharf?
We've made a host of changes, from process to control to cultural changes, to do everything to ensure that that does not happen.
Thank you. Starting again with Mr. Demchek, will you commit today to fight fraud in the Zelle platform by giving your customers their money back? Yes or no?
We return money today for fraud. Scam is a different issue, and the Zelle network and the owners are working to improve, to get all customers' monies back.
Mr. Cestari?
Chairman Brown, we also reimburse for fraud and unauthorized transactions and working hard to work with our customers to educate them on scam issues.
Understanding to people listening that, with the exception of one of you, you are the owners of Zelle. Mr. Rogers?
We reimburse for unauthorized, and we'll work together, and we do a lot of education for our clients to help avoid criminal activity.
Ms. Fraser?
Fraud is obviously a top concern for us. We take it seriously. We reimburse the unauthorized transactions.
Mr. Diamond?
We reimburse unauthorized, and we take a lot of activities to make sure authorized transactions aren't scams.
Mr. Moynihan?
We reimburse today for unauthorized transactions, and like Mr. Diamond said, we do send out notices and everything to avoid.
Mr. Scharf?
We also reimburse for unauthorized transactions, and we as a company, and certainly across EWS, we're all working towards reducing scam and to try and drive it out of the systems.
Okay, last question in my remaining 20 seconds or so. Yes or no question. I asked this question last year. Will you remain neutral if your employees try to unionize? Mr. Scharf?
We believe that we should have a direct relationship with our employees, no.
Mr. Moynihan?
We will operate for our shareholders, our customers, our employees, within what the law allows us to do.
Mr. Diamond?
No.
Ms. Fraser?
We will not commit to being neutral.
Mr. Rogers?
We will not obstruct any activity, but we can't be neutral to the benefits of Truist and what we offer.
Mr. Cesari?
We will not retaliate. We will continue to expect to be close to our employees, but we will abide by the law.
Mr. Demchek in the Union town of Pittsburgh? That was a little bit of an addendum to the
I
other.
was digging in there. No, we wouldn't obstruct, but of course I'd be in conversations with our customers about it, so yes, we'd be involved.
And last statement, I will ask you if I had more time about supporting the child tax credit. You've often come in front of us talking about tax reform, and the child tax credit meant a lot of money for those 6 months, those payments to 2 million children, the families of 2 million children in my state alone meant a lot of money in your accounts. And I would ask you, well, not a question now, but to support the extension of the child tax credit and what it means. Senator, Mr. Secretary, nice to see you. 30 years in this city, so congratulations. Thanks for the work you're doing. Just a few things I'd like to mention in your work of lowering drug costs, addressing pharmacy fees, CMS's announcement just yesterday, it'll be covering up to 8 at-home COVID tests for Medicare beneficiaries. Thank you for all of those things. There's a lot to like in your budget. I would like to pick one thing that I know you agree on. You were helpful in this in the House when you were there. Some time ago, 25 years ago, I think, no, well, more like 25 years ago, Akron Children's Hospital came to the House and asked that we begin something called Children's Hospital GME because they didn't have the dollars through Medicare reimbursement to fund children's hospitals the way that we should. It's clearly the best way to ensure the future of our pediatric provider workforce. It is the single best way to train pediatricians. You know that from your family. You know that from your work. The president's budget proposes $350 million for CHGME. a slight decrease in funding. We had included 375 in the omnibus just passed recently. Well, you work with me and Senator Casey on this committee has been a real leader in other champions here in Congress to make sure we go the right direction, not the wrong direction, since CDBG funding.
Absolutely, Senator. And remember that those numbers that we put out in the budget were based when we thought we would have based on the CR. And so we had to be realistic about where we could go, and the CR was way below what the omnibus is. So don't take those numbers so literally, because they were based on what we knew at the time of the budget being prepared, not what ended up happening with the omnibus.
Thank you, and we will count on that because I know your history and I know your heart on this. Cincinnati is home to 2 CDC NIOSH facilities, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. 550 federal employees conduct cutting-edge research. It's not nearly as well known as it should be. It's really an institute. There is no facility in the world like this NIOSH facility where we really do learn so much through collection of data and study about occupational work injuries and occupational work illnesses. And it really is something I'm particularly proud in my state. HHS several years ago set aside $110 million to consolidate and upgrade the current NIOSH facilities into one building or one set of buildings on the University of Cincinnati, bordering the University of Cincinnati campus. Unfortunately, the Trump administration sidetracked it or worse. And we need to make sure that we move forward on this state of the art by any measure. Would share any update on this project today, if you would, to reassure the NIOSH workforce in the city of Cincinnati and workers around the country that this is going forward?
Senator, we're committed to it because there's no way that OSHA can do its work if NIOSH isn't operating properly. And NIOSH has a great responsibility to make sure we're getting real evidence, real data to OSHA so we can make sure that we're protecting workers against the occupational hazards that we know exist throughout the workplaces in America. So we're very committed to it.
Good. 2 other statements. One, I'd like you to come visit Cincinnati at some point during this,
Done.
and so you can see NIOSH in person. I
Absolutely.
appreciate that. And second, the president recently put out an executive order in support of the use of project labor agreements for large-scale construction projects like the Cincinnati project. It's my expectation that HHS or CDC as its proxy will support the use of a project labor agreement for the construction of this new facility. My staff will be working with your office, with folks at CDC. I'm looking forward to make sure this project, which is about workers, centers workers in its construction in what we need to do.
With you all the way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and very good to see you.
Thank you, Senator Brown, as always, sticking up for the consumer. Thank you.
About Police Week, as we honor the law enforcement officers who made the ultimate sacrifice. Before I do that, I ask that those remarks be a different part of the record from my remarks in response in part to Senator Cruz.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. We know that Putin was shocked by 2 things. He was shocked by the amazing resistance and the strength and the resiliency of the Ukrainian people and the effectiveness of their fight back. Putin really couldn't believe that happened. The other thing that Putin was shocked by was the skill with which President Biden put together this international coalition of Germany, and countries that were not part of this in the past, part of something, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, countries that now, a couple of them want to be in NATO. And that really is the skill of the leadership of President Biden. And I know, in spite of Senator from Texas's comments, I know that most mainstream Republicans support what President Biden's done, support his work on putting together sanctions, on first providing aid for the Ukrainian people, the humanitarian aid, refugees going to Moldova, going to Poland, going to other parts of Eastern and Central and Southern Europe, and the skill at which he has gotten, and the success with which he's gotten weapons to the Ukrainian people, and the skill with which he put together sanctions. A presiding officer, as a member of the Banking Housing Committee, has been part of that with sanctions, and it's really made a difference in keeping these countries together at the fastest pace we could do it, but keeping them together. So most Republicans support what President Biden's done. But, Madam President, I'm not saying that the senator from Texas is part of this, but I have heard Congresswoman Cheney, who is nothing if not a conservative Republican, daughter of a very conservative vice president, active in the Republican Party and Republican leadership. She talks about the Putin wing of the Republican Party. Again, I'm not saying that she includes the senator from Texas in that category. I don't know if she does or she doesn't. I didn't hear her mention names. But I do know that she thinks that a number of Republicans are part of this Putin wing of the Republican Party. And it's despicable, but it's true, and it's disappointing to all of us. And I would add, too, that the senator from Texas maybe missed the news as he was talking about chips, computer chips, about semiconductors, that Intel made a huge announcement that they're coming to Ohio. They're going to invest billions of dollars. They're going to hire 5,000 building tradespeople, 5,000 tradespeople over a 10-year period to build these fabs. Imagine the size of that. I've never seen anything like that. So I'm excited what we're doing, and that's why it's so important, Senator Wyden, the work that Senator Wyden and I and others are doing on making sure that we pass the USICA, the Innovation and Competitiveness Act. It's so important to our country. It's so important to workers. We're finally putting workers at the center of our economic policy, and that's a thrill. And as President Biden said on the Senate floor, we're finally burying the term Rust Belt. We're burying it in Columbus with Intel. We're burying it in Northwest Ohio with solar manufacturing. We're burying it in Southwest Ohio with new generation of jet fuel and jet engines. We're burying it in Cleveland with what we're doing with NASA. We're burying it in Youngstown with our manufacturing camps and all that we're doing for America Works. So, Madam President, I now ask the remaining...
Will the senator yield for question?
Certainly.
Just a moment ago, the senator from Ohio made reference to the alleged existence of a so-called Putin wing of the Republican Party. I'd like to ask the senator from Ohio, is it accurate that the senator from Ohio and 43 of his Democratic colleagues in January of this year voted against sanctioning Nord Stream 2, sanctioning Russia, sanctioning Putin, despite the fact that Ukraine begged the Senate to pass those sanctions, and Putin invaded Ukraine just days after 44 Democrats sided with Russia and Putin?
I take back my time. I've heard no Democrat talk. I've heard nobody talk about the Putin wing of the Democratic Party. No Democrat believes that. I hear just down the hall, 100 yards, Congresswoman Cheney talk about the Putin wing of the Republican Party. I'm not into inter-party fights. I'm only pointing that out. And I want to get to this. We expect to vote it soon after 6, and I want to get back to my remarks. I appreciate the engagement of Senator Cruz on this issue. Witnesses are in person. Members have the option to appear either in person or virtually. Every day, Americans get up, go to work, and do their jobs. But as we know this week, our Republican colleagues refused to do theirs. On Tuesday, this committee met to vote on 5 outstanding nominees for the Federal Reserve. Republicans didn't show up, not a one. Instead, they went AWOL in the fight against inflation. At this pivotal moment in our economic recovery, everyone understands we need a full Federal Reserve Board. It would be the first time in nearly a decade where all 7 confirmed members sat at the Fed to help tackle inflation. Republicans have no solutions, only political stunts. Americans don't want more political theatrics. They want actions and solutions to bring down costs. We will not stop fighting for these nominees. These nominees, let me just tell you what they've all done. They've met with every single senator who asked for a meeting, on committee, off the committee. They met with committee staff, majority and minority. They offered to meet with many of my colleagues who refused to meet with them, and some of them then boycotted the vote. They answered every question posed to them at the hearing. They answered every question submitted for the record, more than 200 of them, in a timely manner. One nominee even answered questions submitted after the deadline. If we're going to continue growing our economy, we need all 7 governors in place. We need these professionals working and debating and making decisions about monetary policy and interest rates and jobs and tackling inflation. I implore my Republican colleagues to show up and vote. Vote yes, vote no, just show up and vote. It's your job. I implore, and the American people expect, for you to do your jobs just like they do every day. Let me read a few headlines from the past few weeks. Strong jobs report shows resilient economy. January jobs report crushes expectations. Biden sets first-year record with 6.6 million jobs added. In my state, long derided as the Rust Belt, Ohioans have been waking up to headlines like these. Intel picks Ohio for largest chip factory in the world. Hyperion Fuel Cell Company to open largest Columbus factory in a decade. GE Aviation lands $6.8 billion engine deal in sign of rebound from pandemic. Intel's investment, game changer for Ohio jobs. America is in the midst of unprecedented economic growth. Our GDP grew by 5.7% last year, the strongest annual growth in 40 years. For the first time in 2 decades, and this is, I think, particularly significant, our economy grew faster than the economy of China. Job creation hit an all-time high. We added 6.4 million jobs last year, an average of more than 500,000 jobs every single month. We saw the fastest drop ever in the unemployment rate. American entrepreneurs started more than 5 million new businesses in 2021, another record. Raw job numbers, of course, don't tell the whole story. They don't tell you how good the job is, what kind of wage it pays. On that front, though, the news is perhaps even better. Wages are rising, particularly for hourly workers who've been left behind in past economic recoveries. Workers are finally starting to share in more of the economic growth that they create. American families' disposable incomes were higher in 2021 than they were before the pandemic, even adjusting for inflation. Assistant Secretary of Treasury Ben Harris said 2 weeks ago, household balance sheets were exceptionally healthy, due in part to the American Rescue Plan, other government pandemic assistance, and brisk wage growth. This progress was possible because of the American Rescue Plan. We promised shots in arms, money in pockets, workers back on the job, and the American Rescue Plan delivered. We know the challenges made. For the progress we've made, we can't deny that many of the people we serve say they don't feel it. People are exhausted. They're tired of this pandemic. They're tired of the anxiety. They're tired of the way it's divided neighbors and divided schools and divided families. The number one thing we do to improve our economy, improve people's lives, is to defeat this pandemic. And we are on the right course. Cases and hospitalizations are dropping. Because of the American Rescue Plan, great majority of Americans are now vaccinated. Everyone can get a booster shot. We no longer have to live in fear. We also know the pandemic has caused inflation to run too high. Workers feel it every time they go to the grocery store. Inflation's a real problem and one that we as a country need to address directly. It's all the more reason why we need a full Federal Reserve Board. Pandemics revealed our supply chains are too long and too fragile. Causes higher prices in some industries. No one wants to have to go to 3 different stores to get their shopping done or to have every option they try to buy on back order for months. It's maddening, it's draining, it's frustrating for the American public. We know how to fix it. You make more things in America. For too long, our trade policy, our tax policy have encouraged corporations to move production overseas. It's cost us millions of jobs, especially in the states of Pennsylvania and Ohio. It's contributing to our supply chain problems today. It's time to bring these supply chains back home. The House and Senate have passed bills to spur domestic manufacturing and research and development. They will allow us to better compete with countries like China. They'd support the production of key inputs like semiconductors. We should put a comprehensive bill on the president's desk soon. We also took an important step to speed up our supply chain by passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill to improve our roads and our bridges and ports, making it easier and more efficient for American manufacturers to get products to market. As important as these steps are, government is not the only actor here. Corporate consolidation is reducing competition, giving consumers fewer choices and workers fewer options. Nobody explains better in the meatpacking industry than my colleague from Montana, Senator Tester, what's happened there. Too often corporations increase prices while cutting an even larger check for executives and shareholders. The Wall Street Journal tells us that two-thirds of the largest publicly traded companies reported larger profits in 2021 than they did in 2019. In recent weeks, CEOs have bragged to Wall Street about their ability to increase prices on consumers. Let's be clear, raising prices is a choice, is a decision that corporations make. They could make a different choice. They could reduce the amount of stock buybacks. Millionaire executives could actually take a bit of a pay cut or even just get a smaller raise this year. But there's nothing forcing them to make a better choice because there isn't enough competition in the economy. We need an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. We can't declare the recovery complete until all workers can find a job that pays them fair wages, that treats them with dignity, and that allows them to keep up with the cost of living. Today, we'll hear from all three members of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, Chair Rouse, Dr. Bernstein, Dr. Boucher. These are skilled economists who understand that behind all the charts and models and tables are real people with hopes, dreams, and ambition. As Chair Rouse said in January, the actions that the Biden administration have taken led, quote, to unprecedented improvement in our economy and important investments made in its future productive capacity. I look forward to hearing more about this year of unprecedented growth, the current state of the economy, and plans to continue this expansion. Ranking Member Toomey.
Officer, today's powerful new sanctions against hundreds of Putin allies are another critical step in U.S. leadership, bringing our allies together to ratchet up pressure on Russia to halt its brutal invasion of Ukraine. I think, Mr. President, Putin has been shocked by a couple things. Putin has been shocked that the Ukrainians have had such furious, effective, courageous resistance. He didn't see that coming. The other thing that's shocked Putin has been that the skill that President Biden, with which President Biden assembled this coalition of countries to stand up to Putin, to provide assistance to refugees and assistance to Ukrainians in their country, to provide military assistance, and to put the squeeze on sanctions against Russia. He's assembled this coalition skillfully including countries like Germany and Sweden and Finland and Switzerland, even countries that never really played here, nobody really expected. And Biden has brought them in a coalition and extracted, and with the right kind of target on sanctions. Where sanctions, in addition to sanctioning the banks and the oil companies, in addition to sanctioning the oligarchs and Putin himself, the president's announcing now sanctioning Russian parliamentarians and the parliament itself, the Russian Duma, dozen more Russian arms merchants and defense firms that have enabled this war, in additional Putin cronies, including the CEO of Russia's largest banks. I don't understand opposition to what we're trying to do. I don't know. Do we have members of the Senate perhaps that for whatever reason side with Putin or side with the oligarchs? I don't know. But this is legislation we ought to be able to get moving quickly through this body as it did in the House. As long as Putin's invasion goes on, we'll continue to lead the world, turning up the heat and weakening Russia's war machine. Today I come to the floor to support the removal of permanent normal trade relations with Russia. It's not, as the presiding officer from Maryland knows, it's not the first time a number of us have been concerned about our government's mistakes, in large part because of corporate lobbying, on permanent normal trade relations with countries around the world. One of the worst decisions ever made in this body, or at least in recent history, and the damage it did to manufacturing in the industrial Midwest and elsewhere, was giving permanent normal trade relations to China and the advantages that gave them, so American companies, always in pursuit of cheaper labor, if going south wasn't good enough, they'd go to Mexico, then they'd go to China, close the plants in Ohio or Western Maryland, move to China, open up plants there with cheap labor and with pretty much non-existent environmental regulations, and then ship those jobs back to the United States. That was permanent normal trade relations with China that we gave them some 20 years ago. There was a horrible mistake, but today this is about, for a different reason, permanent normal trade relations with Russia that we have granted. The president's already committed to ending permanent normal trade relations with Russia. The House has already passed a bill ending PNTR with Russia. So what are Senate Republicans waiting for? Russia should not have free and unlimited access to Americans' economy or to the global economy. There should be no place for Putin and his cronies to hide. We're trying to get this done in the Senate. I was on the floor yesterday hoping we could see this done then. 24 hours more has passed, 24 hours more of Putin attacking as a war criminal, people in Ukraine, people who are innocent, people who should never have to deal with this. Another night in Ukraine under fire from an unprovoked Russian advance on civilian families. Another day of destruction of civilian buildings in peaceful cities. So waiting every day hurts the Ukrainian people. We need to do our part to give the president immediate legal authority. He needs to work with our allies on this, to shut off access to favorable tariff treatment for Russia's goods here and around the world. Senator Paul, one Republican senator needs to relent to let us pass this. I mean, I know what Liz Cheney, a member of the House, the daughter of Vice President Cheney under President Bush, I know what she said some time ago. She talked, and she's a Republican, talked about the Putin wing of the Republican Party. I have no idea who in this body is in the Putin wing of the Republican Party, but I do know that there's resistance on the other side of the aisle to doing what we need to do to give President Biden even more tools to do even more than he's already done in this. The bill passed the House with a nearly unanimous vote. We need to finalize it in the Senate so we can ratchet up the pressure further, cut off Russia's ability to finance its unprovoked invasion of another member country of the World Trade Organization. Even before this war, we knew that Russia, like China, games the rules. They cheat on trade. I said it yesterday on the floor. They subsidize their industries. They pollute the environment to gain that unfair advantage. It's cheaper to make something if you don't dispose of waste, or you put contaminants into the air instead of disposing of them in another way. Ohioans know all too well about being forced to compete with countries that cheat. Why have we let another day go by with this still on the books? If we don't remove it now, Russia will continue to use this status to position their industries in the global market, hurting American companies in the process. It's not a partisan issue. A couple of weeks ago, maybe almost a month ago, I introduced a bicameral bipartisan bill with Senator Cassidy of Louisiana to remove Russia's permanent normal trade relations status. There's bipartisan support to do this quickly. I've worked with my colleague Senator Crapo on many Russian sanctions efforts over the years. I trust him. I know we share the same goals. But it's Senator Paul speaking for whoever on this, not letting this bill through. I'm hopeful there's a path forward. I hope we can work out differences quickly. The majority, an overwhelming majority of this body wants to move. We should all stand together saying countries that invade a sovereign nation will not have free and unrestricted access to our economy, period. Again, countries that invade another sovereign nation should not have free and unrestricted access to our economy. It's time to come together to end permanent normal trade relations with Russia.